called Green Shoots in a Red Zone, where we look at the agricultural input sector and the outlook for it in the future. With a good monsoon already predicted for it, it could be interesting times for this. Before I hand over to my actual speakers for the day, just a few groundkeeping rules. All attendee lines will be muted through the session, and your video will be disabled also. The Q&A option on the bottom of the menu at the bottom of your screens, whether it's your phones or your PCs, is open throughout the session. Please feel free to use this to ask any questions to the panel. We're there for you. Also, if we're not able to take your questions in our Q&A session at the end of today, we will return to you with answers for most of them. Everyone should also note that we will be sharing the presentation, the replay, as well as a podcast and an infographic on today's session. All of this will be shared with you in the coming days post the session. Without further ado, I would like to now state that this session is also being recorded externally. And now I would like to welcome my colleague Vaibhav Gupta. Vaibhav is an experienced banker who is working for HSBC for 22 years. He currently manages the business banking unit for HSBC in South India and is based out of Chennai. Vaibhav has an extensive experience in managing SME clients across transaction banking and lending and has worked in all regions of India and hence holds a pan-India perspective across India industries and sectors. Over to you, Vaibhav.
Thank you, Subhash. Good morning, namaskar, and vanakkam to all. I'm happy to welcome all of you on behalf of Team HSBC India on this very interesting webinar on agriculture input sector. And to me, this is a very important and a topical subject, given that we are in the middle of a monsoon season, and it seems that rain gods have been till now kind to us, almost in all parts of India, even some bit more kinder in some other parts of India. And as you know, that monsoon has always played a very important factor on the agriculture output in India. And as you all know, that output is the function of what goes in as input. This subject becomes even more important from the agriculture perspective. So in this session, we cover certain aspects of agriculture inputs like seeds, agrochemicals, farm equipments, pumps, etc. during this session. Given the times we are all going through very difficult and very interesting times both, all eyes are on agriculture sector, as any positive impact on this sector will have direct impact on bouncing back of economy. Therefore, to get a feel on as to what is there in store for all of us from this sector, especially from the inputs perspective of agriculture, we have lined up a very impressive set of experts from CRISIL, a very reputed credit agency, credit rating organization of India. So I'm therefore delighted to call upon our first speaker for session today, which is Deepti Deshpande. Welcome, Deepti. Deepti is a senior economist at CRISIL. Prior to joining CRISIL in 2010, she worked with institutional equities research business at Edelweiss Securities, Bombay. She has 12 years of experience in the field of macroeconomic research. Some of her research work has been on the field of inflation, monetary policy, estimating the long-term pension liability for the government due to aging population, studying the vulnerability of India's agriculture stress, tracking and studying Indian monsoon. So it would be interesting from her to hear. Assessing what a pro-jobs policy can mean for India, studying India's quality of growth, assessing performance of Indian states, and studying the implications of global developments on Indian economy. She has been part of Standard & Poor's Asia Economic Research Team and has published articles for S&P as well as in opinion and editorial articles in business magazines and newspapers. So over to you, Deepti. Deepti, are you there?
Deepti, I guess you need to unmute.
Hello.
Hi, Deepti. You're audible. Please continue. Thank you.
Okay. So I can just begin altogether again. So thank you everybody for setting the context right. A very good morning to all. The coronavirus pandemic has pushed almost all major economies into a recession and has threatened financial stability. These are difficult times indeed, unprecedented and uncertain. The scenario that we are all operating in is one that is a trade-off between loss of lives and loss of livelihood. Days to come will bring several key challenges in the way households and firms spend, access services, save, and invest. One definite key change in the forthcoming quarters is that the role of the government in driving growth is going to inevitably rise. India started off on a weak note, so our ability to brace the crisis was low. Hence, the impact on India is perhaps being felt greater than many other economies. In our base case, we expect GDP to fall 5% in fiscal 2021. The nationwide stringent lockdown in April and May, periodic outbreaks in key metros, and tightening of social distancing measures have all taken a toll on economic activity, the costs of which are much higher than what we all expected. A bigger challenge, like I said, compared to other countries, is that our immunity was low when we started. Consumption was weak, private corporate investment was also weak, the financial sector was under stress, and government finances stretched. Now, fiscal support has been forthcoming, but it's been small given tight government finances. The central bank has extended several measures to ease credit conditions, but risk aversion in the economy means that lenders are wary to lend until there's visibility of A, demand revival, and B, assurance that money lent out will be paid back. All this has led to financial conditions being tight and overall demand conditions staying weak. Policy impact on growth, therefore, so far remains somewhat muted except in pockets. All this means our ability to catch up to trend level of GDP, at least in real terms, in the coming years is low. We estimate this loss of not being able to catch up to trend at 10% of GDP over the next 3 to 4 years. Now, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, agriculture is a harbinger of growth. Rains so far have been timely, normal, and even abundant in some areas, and sowing progress is encouraging. Some of these numbers my colleagues will share in greater detail. What we also know is that higher government procurement of food grains expected this year to support the food support scheme that it could also spur production. And finally, an increase in minimum support prices promises to offer better returns to farmers. Moving on with the next slide, I think an interesting point to note is that in the last 70 years, India saw GDP contract only thrice. And it was a monsoon failure in each of these years when output collapsed. This time, as we know, it's different. Of course, the share of agriculture was also much higher in previous years. This fiscal, we know for sure, or rather what we're estimating is that agriculture is expected to see a near trend growth rate, and it is a non-agriculture sector that is in fact going to collapse. With only 15% share in GDP, agriculture, we know, doesn't have quite the heft to offset the deep hit to non-agriculture sectors, but it still supports over 40% of the working population in India, and therefore, good monsoons and a great agriculture year is definitely supportive. Overall, good performance of agriculture also augurs well for rural demand. With a large number of migrants moving back, the dependence on agriculture for incomes is high. Besides the support from PM Kisan, there is topping up of NREGA by about 40,000 crores for this fiscal, which also helps. Another point to note is that good agriculture production this year can help cushion the impact in some states with high COVID case incidences, forced lockdowns, and extended restrictions. We put together a matrix which suggests that Maharashtra and Haryana, for instance, are two states that need good rains to buffer some of the COVID hit impact. On the other side are states with low caseloads where a good agriculture year could put their growth ahead of other states. That includes states like AP and MP, Andhra Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh that have high dependence on agri for output, and also high dependence for employment and a relatively less COVID hit. Now, to monitor rains, CRISIL has developed its own tool called the Deficient Rainfall Impact Parameter, or DRIP, where we put together information on rainfall and irrigation to study the impact of rains. Our belief is that merely looking at rainfall information is not sufficient to assess the impact on crops as well as on states, and hence the need to look at how irrigation in that particular area or for that particular crop is. If you look at this chart that's displayed before you, the left panel talks about the drip scores for crops. The way to look at this is that the blue line indicates drip scores for 2019 and the red bar indicates drip scores for 2020. The tick marks or the horizontal lines that you see are basically the average of drip scores for the last 5 years. A higher drip score indicates higher adverse impact. The way to look at the chart for the crop-wise drip scores is that so far, given the impact of rainfall and given the condition of irrigation, none of the crop scores for drip for 2020 are showing any sort of an alarm. They are lower than last year as well as lower than the average. Similarly is what we look at in terms of state-wise drip scores. Except for Rajasthan, where rainfall deficiency so far is recorded at around 24% below normal, almost all other states, there is really no reason to worry in terms of a deficiency so far. We keep monitoring these drip scores on a weekly basis. So, with rainfall information that's available as of Wednesday of every week. Now, moving on, other than normal monsoon, our growth forecast for fiscal 2021 is also dependent on the assumption that the current wave of pandemic is significantly controlled in the ongoing quarter and there is no second wave. We are assuming another fiscal stimulus to the tune of 1% of GDP, which might come through as the recovery sets in more so towards Q2 end or Q3. We also believe manufacturing could revive faster while services could lag. Overall, we expect Q1 that has just gone by to be worst affected, but recovery in Q2 has also been wobbly if you look at high frequency indicators. So economic activity will remain subnormal this quarter too, and we only expect growth to turn mildly positive from Q3 onwards. Overall, we also believe fiscal 2022 will see a growth spurt to around a growth rising to around 8.5% or so on a weak base, some impact of pent-up demand and fiscal stimulus, and a rising tide effect because globally too a growth spurt is expected. But downside risks to our forecasts have accentuated in recent times. Some regions where the COVID-19 cases have spread faster have reintroduced containment measures, which once again puts the brake on economic activity. So longer time to contain cases or a second wave, if at all, can pull GDP down further. Also, any further worsening of stress in the financial sector can be a drag. So far, we are not looking at monsoon failure as a risk because it is predicted to be normal and the progress so far is good. However, we will continue to monitor monsoon in terms of its timeliness and also spread. With that, I wrap up the part on economy outlook and hand it over to my colleague Pushin to take you all through our outlook on agriculture inputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dipti, for sharing your views on the economy and specifically also on the drip scores, which we can see that the stress as compared to last year is much lower. So now we'll move the presentation to specifics on the agriculture dynamics, and we'll start our discussion with the crop dynamics. And what we've seen so far in terms of the crop dynamics is, as of last Friday, the acreage for the Kharif season has been higher by about 21%. While that sounds quite encouraging, if we look at the number closely, it's actually on a low base. And the monsoon in June specifically has been mirroring 2015 levels. But if we look at the monsoon spread so far, most of the key regions have normal monsoon, which is indicated by the green shaded areas, Some regions like Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Bihar, in fact, have excess rains. And like Deepti pointed out, the only stress that we observe to some extent is in Rajasthan, which has rainfall deviation of around -24%, with -20% till -20% being considered normal. However, if we look at the sowing, which is up 21%, what's important to note here is if we look at the sowing in 2020, that is this year, and compare that to 2015, one would see that the sowing is pretty much in sync with how 2015 was, close to about 320 lakh hectares that happened by about 30th June. One can also observe that post June, the sowing in 2015 sort of went towards the trend. In 2020, while the sowing is still higher than the normal, which is indicated by the shaded area here, one can clearly see that it is going towards the trend. And we believe that the sowing would be definitely higher than 2015 levels and would be about 2 to 3% above normal, which is about 1,044 lakh hectares by 30th of September. The reason for that is that if we look at the chart below here, which shows the monsoon deviation as well as the amount of sowing that has happened for the Kharif season, what one can see is about 30% of the entire Kharif season sowing has happened in the month of June itself, compared to about only 14% that had happened in June last year. And the reason for that is last year, June had a 30% deficiency in rainfall compared to normal, while we're at a 24% excess in June this year. So much of the sowing has been advanced, which is why we believe that the 21% higher number will not sustain over a period of time. And we're looking at a closer to about 2 to 3% growth over normal. And if we, like I was mentioning earlier, if we compare 2020 to 2015, both seasons saw close to about 30% sowing in June, and monsoon was also much higher at about 25-26% above normal. Currently, if we talk about monsoon as of yesterday, the monsoon is about 6% higher than normal, and which is what makes us believe that things will be moving towards the trend. Now, having spoken about sowing, let's look at specific crop categories and our outlook for the current Kharif season, where the sowing typically takes place between June, July, August, and some part even in November. In September. So if you look at cereals, we're expecting a 1% increase in the sowing, and that's largely attributable to higher sowing. We're witnessing increase in sowing in the eastern belt, UP, Bihar, Odisha, West Bengal. There's been a lot of migration of laborers back to these states, and hence a lot of land is now coming back into sowing, and which is leading to a 1% increase in sowing. However, it's also important to note that maize sowing is actually expected to decline because the prices have been going down owing to lower poultry demand. So that's on the cereal side. In case of cash crops, we're witnessing an increase in acreage for sugarcane. However, that is being offset to a great extent by cotton, where the acreage is expected to decline in the key growing states like Gujarat and Maharashtra, while it will still increase in states like Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, owing to the government incentives and the government push to sow that crop. In case of oilseeds, we're expecting an increase in sowing for both soybean in Madhya Pradesh as well as groundnut in Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. In case of pulses, we're seeing a sharp increase in sowing, and the sowing is expected to increase by about 7%. And there are two reasons for that. One is that the prices for the crops have been increasing over the last 1 year, which is giving the farmers confidence to go for the crop, keeping the higher remuneration in mind. And the second is, towards the initial part of the lockdown, there was a lot of scare about consuming non-vegetarian food, and pulses have been a good source of protein. Also, people have been hoarding this commodity to a great extent, which has supported the prices. And that's one of the reasons why the pulses acreage is increasing. Overall, if we look at all of this, we're expecting about a 2% increase in acreage for the field crops. Now, moving to the horticulture crops, that is the fruits, vegetables, and spices, we're seeing a slight increase in acreage for apple and banana, and that's owing to the National Horticulture Mission that the government is driving. In case of vegetables, the sowing is expected to be flat. There will be some increase in sowing for brinjal. However, given the losses that farmers have made on the tomato crop and the kind of damages seen last year, we're expecting a decline in the sowing for tomato, which will offset each other. In case of spices, we're expecting an increase in the sowing for the chili commodity. However, there could be some pressure while selling the commodity, given that 15% of it is exported. Overall, if we talk about the sowing, putting together both field as well as horticulture crops, we're looking at close to about 2% increase in sowing and about a 3% increase in the productivity, given a normal monsoon with a good spread, which will take the overall production higher by about 5%. So that's again going to provide a lot of comfort to farmers this year, although that could have some negative bearing on prices to some extent. Now, having looked at how the area, yield, and production could be, if we talk about the overall profitability that we expect for farmers this year, we're expecting the profit per hectare to increase by about 2%. And given that the number of hectares itself is expected to increase this year, we're expecting the absolute profits, that is the total cash profits for the farmers, to rise by about 4%. And these profitability estimates are at a C2 cost. So they are a comprehensive way of looking at cost, which also looks at the imputed rent on land as well as capital costs. So the notional costs are also accounted for. Specifically, if we look at the regional opportunities, we can see an increase in profit expected for the northern states, Punjab, Haryana. There we're expecting increase in paddy MSP, higher government procurement to drive profit for the field crops. If we talk about the northern region, for the horticulture crops, we're expecting a decline in profitability because of onion and tomato leading to lower prices as well. But there is some support that we're seeing from apple. Last year, there were hailstorms, which had led to a decline in the apple profitability. But this year, Jammu and Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Himachal are going to see a good quality crop, which should support profitability to some extent. For the southern states, here, the southern states are stronger on the horticulture side. A lot of sowing takes place on the horticulture. While if we look at the pan-India picture, about 85% of the sown area is under field crops and only 15% is under the horticulture crops. While the horticulture crops are more remunerative, still farmers have been going with the traditional crops, and which is something that the government is trying to change. But in the southern region, we're seeing the share of horticulture is higher. In the southern region specifically, we're looking at a 3% increase in profit for the field crops. That's because the government, especially in states like AP and Telangana, is participating in state level procurement. But on the horticulture crops, we're expecting a decline in profitability. One reason for that is chili, which is sown to a great extent there. Like I mentioned earlier, the exports are expected to decline on that front. And about 50% of our exports are to China. For the eastern states, we're witnessing a sharp increase in profitability. And the reason for the increase in profitability, one is a very low base. You can see that it's much lower than the other states. So there is an increase that we're observing in the productivity, as well as the pulses prices are going to support profitability. But for similar reasons, like I mentioned for the other states, we're expecting a bearish trend on prices for horticulture commodities, which will drive down the profitability for eastern states. In case of the western states, cotton, like I mentioned, we're expecting the prices for cotton to be lower by about 8 to 10% this year, and that is going to drive down the profitability in Gujarat and Maharashtra on the field crop side, and onion and tomato to some extent will drive down profitability on the western side. However, if we look at the overall picture, given that kharif crops, the field crops have a higher share in the overall profitability, we're still looking at northern and eastern states increasing profitability by 3 and 21%, and the extent of decline even in the southern and western states is only 2 to 4%, and these are at a per hectare level. If we look at the total hectares and the absolute profit, overall India should witness about a 4% increase in profitability. So that's on the profitability from the cultivation activities. So like I mentioned earlier, field and horticulture crops, specifically on field crops, we're expecting an increase in profitability, some decline on the horticulture front. But on the other activities, Manrega, we're seeing a 40,000 crore increase in allocation, and that should support incomes for rural India. Also, dairy is something that we believe will support incomes this year. Last year, we had a decline in milk production to the tune of about 3 to 4% because we had a prolonged summer and deficient monsoon to begin with. This year, we're expecting the dairy production, milk production to increase by 5%, and that should lead to a 3% increase in the dairy incomes. So what we have in the center here is incomes of per farmer at an annual level, and we're looking at the income to increase by about 8%. And these incomes that we just discussed, they account for about 50% of the farming income, the remaining 50% coming from non-farming activities like government jobs and other wages. But overall, we can say that the absolute incomes for farmers are expected to increase by about 8% this year, and which definitely bodes well for the input sector. So having discussed about the incomes, I think it sets the context for the discussion on the input sector. So we'll discuss about three sectors today, that are seeds, agrochemicals, within which we will focus on the pesticide segment, and farm equipment. So if we look at these three segments, they've been having a reasonable growth last year, growing at about close to 7 to 11% between these three sectors. This year, we're expecting the farm equipment sector to grow by about 5 to 7%, and the other segments to show muted growth. The farm equipment sector has one of the highest SME shares in the input industry at about 60 to 70%, and the other two segments, seeds and agrochemicals, have share of around 15 to 20%. What's going to drive the revenue growth this year for seeds? We believe that the increase in sowing is going to help the seed revenue. In case of agrochemicals, again, better farmer incomes is going to support the agrochemical sector. And in case of the farm equipment sector, one of the reasons why we believe a higher growth will actually be possible for the sector is because of lower labor availability, and that too in the critical farm producing states. So that's going to drive the farm equipment revenue growth this year. So now we'll move to the specifics of each of these sectors, beginning with how the value chain evolves. We'll start with the seed sector. What we see in the seed industry is that about 80% of the revenue comes from the field crops, and about 20% from the vegetable commodities. And specifically, if we look at what has been the dynamics around this, hybridization is one of the things that is critical for the seed industry. Cotton commodity, interestingly, plays a very critical role in the seed sector. So out of this 80%, 1/3 of the revenue comes from cotton. So cotton plays a critical role in this sector. And you'll recall that I mentioned that we're slightly bearish on cotton this year, where we expect Gujarat and Maharashtra, the key cotton producing states, the acreage to reduce. So while that is expected to bring down the revenues for the sector to some extent, it's going to be more than offset by higher revenue that we expect on the field crop side, where we expect the sowing to increase significantly. If you look at the field crops, how the hybridization has evolved over the last 5 years, it was close to about 57% in fiscal 15. It's gone down to about 49%, and that's because of the decline in the cotton seed prices, which are regulated by the government. In case of vegetables, though, we are seeing that the hybridization has actually increased from 44% to 48%. So there's a structural increase that we are witnessing for the vegetable hybridization. Now, overall, if you look at the seed sector, given that slight decline in revenues on cotton being offset by the other segments, we're expecting a 1% increase in the seed sector revenue. And if we compare that with the 5-year average growth, that stands at about 3.5%. Now, what I would want to draw your attention to on this slide is, what we've done here is we've put the share of sown area for the major states in India. And what you will see here is that 4 states, that is Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Rajasthan. The numbers that you see here are the share in sown area. So these 4 states account for half of the sown area in India. So from a seed perspective, definitely these 4 states are of a lot of meaning in terms of, and most of these states are expected to show an increase in revenue this year, which is indicated by the greens, and the reds are much lesser. You would observe only Gujarat and Maharashtra, which have collectively a share of around 18% in sown area. They are the ones that are expected to show a decline in revenue, and that's because they have a high share in cotton. And in case of cotton specifically, about 15 to 20% of cotton is exported. We believe that textile being a discretionary good, it's going to be impacted severely by the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is one reason why the cotton prices have been falling. And we're expecting that to be close to about 5,000 rupees per quintal this year. And hence, farmers have taking cognizance of these early signs, and the sowing is expected to decline for the full season in Gujarat and Maharashtra. But that's not the case in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. What we're observing is that the government is encouraging farmers to actually go for the crops. Specifically in Telangana, the government has set targets for the farmers of what crops they need to sow. And the government is also giving them confidence that they will procure these crops. And the farmers have a precedence to fall back on, because that's what the government did in the Rabi season. So we're seeing a sharp increase in the cotton acreage in Telangana. Moving on to the financial parameters, like I mentioned earlier, SMEs have a share of about 20%. We're expecting a revenue growth of around 1%. The cost parameters are expected to be similar on year, and hence the margins are expected to slightly improve this year. If we talk about the debtor days, last year the debtor days had increased. That was because the per hectare profitability for the Kharif season last year had fallen as per our estimates by about 7 to 9%, and that led to delays in payments from the farmer end to the dealers, and hence the debtor days had increased. This year, with better incomes, we're expecting the debtor days to reduce. Creditor days also will reduce in sync with that, and inventory days are expected to increase because the seed companies have factored higher sowing for cotton, which is not going to happen. That's going to lead to an increase in the sowing in the inventory for the cotton seed. Overall, the working capital should remain stable. Now, before I move on to the agrochemicals pesticide segment, one thing that we believe holds value and opportunity for the seed sector is the hybridization and seed replacement rate. One can see in case of field crops, the hybridization rate has increased from 22% to 27% over the last 22% to 26% over the last 5 years, and are expected to inch up further. In case of vegetables, it's quite high. So there is a lot of scope for more hybridization on the field crops, and specifically the focus needs to be on states which are more profitable, such as the northern states, Punjab and Haryana. And that's where definitely some opportunity lies. The seed replacement rate also for vegetables is quite healthy at around 87%. It's only half of field crops, and that's something which also holds some value. In terms of other incremental opportunities, we believe that while cotton has been saturated to a great extent on the hybridization front, manufacturers need to look at non-cotton segments as a way forward. Another development that has happened is the Seed Bill 2020. I'll just quickly touch upon that. And what this mentions is that earlier, manufacturers could go for a truthfully labeled seed, and while selling it, now there is a registration process that needs to be done. So in case even a farmer wants to sell his seeds, he needs to actually register, and the registration process is slightly elaborate. So that's a change and a deterrent to some extent for small manufacturers that has happened recently. So with that, I'll move to the next segment, which is the agrochemicals, and this is a segment which is has a really high export share. About 50%, more than 50% of what we manufacture is exported. Interestingly, India is the fourth largest manufacturer of pesticides. So we make about 10% of the pesticides globally, although we consume only 5% of the pesticides. Our per hectare pesticide consumption is about 0.6 kilograms per hectare. If we compare that to China, it's about close to 13 kilograms per hectare in China. China clearly is consuming a lot. India is underpenetrated. But the message is that there is a lot of promise that this segment holds, given that we are underpenetrated in pesticide usage. Now, if we look at the growth over the last 5 years, again, there is a lot of promise that one see. We've grown at about 10%, close to 10% for the last 5 years, growing from about 30,000 crores to close to 50,000 crores in revenue. This year, we're expecting growth of only about 1 to 2%. And that the reason for that is because 50% of what we manufacture is exported, and we're expecting slight decline there. So while the domestic part of the business is still expected to grow by about 6%, the exports, which I'll cover in the next slide, is expected to decline. I'll also want to draw your attention to another fact that distinguishes us from the global pesticide consumption. If you see the chart over here, what you can see is that 45% of the pesticides sold globally is insecticides, and that number, rather I should say 45% is herbicides, and that number reduces significantly in India to only about 22%. And that's because of the lower labor costs that we have in India, which leads to lesser herbicide consumption. But that's something that we're expecting to change. Also, given that India has a tropical climate, our insecticide consumption is more than half, at about 55%, while that is only about 1/4 globally. If we see this year specifically, we're expecting a 9% increase in herbicide sales. That's on account of increased sowing for paddy, which has a lot of herbicide consumption that goes along with it, and also because of lower labor availability in states like Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, and Gujarat. That will also drive the herbicide consumption. The other segments growing close to about 5%. Now, I spoke about exports earlier, and we're expecting a 3% decline in exports. And you would observe that if you look at our export basket, about the top three countries, that is US, Brazil, and France, account for close to about 50% of our exports. And these are severely impacted by COVID. There have been some trade restrictions, and that is expected to lead to a 3% decline. And while the first half will see a sharp decline, we're expecting about 22%. We're expecting a recovery in the second half. And what's providing some hope is that more than 50% of pesticide consumption happens in the second half, which you can see on the chart here. And most pesticide guzzling commodities, crops like soybean, corn, cotton, are sown in these regions in the second half. And that should lead to a demand revival in H2 by about 12%, taking the overall growth to about minus 3% for the export segment. Now, this slide, similar to what you saw in the seed slide, you saw the sown area, which was shown by these circles. What we've added here is the share of pesticide consumption. So what's important to note here is that while states like UP have a commensurate pesticide consumption, so the share in sown area is 15%, the pesticide consumption is also close to 15%. But a state like Madhya Pradesh is quite underpenetrated. Only 3% share in pesticide consumption, while 13% share in the sown area. Similarly, the case for Rajasthan, 9% share in sown area, only 3% consumption. We believe that these two states hold a lot of promise in terms of increasing the pesticide consumption in these states. Other states like Punjab and Haryana, which are more remunerative, which have higher profitability, you can see that the share in sown area is lesser, while that in pesticide consumption is higher. Also, in case of Maharashtra, given that this state is also one of the largest producers of grapes, which is heavy on pesticide consumption, you can see that the share in pesticide consumption is much higher. But what we believe is that there are incremental opportunities in states like Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan for increasing the pesticide sales. The top 8 states in India account for close to about 70% of pesticide consumption. Specifically speaking about SME clusters, and SMEs account for about 15 to 20% share in pesticide manufacturing. Ahmedabad is a cluster that largely does domestic manufacturing, and with crude oil prices falling, we believe that this segment, this cluster is going to benefit because of the lower crude oil prices. Delhi, on the other hand, the COVID cases have been rising. Also, it has excessive dependence on imports, and we import a lot from China. While we export 50% of what we make, we also import close to 50% of what we make. So that is something that has been causing some concern in Delhi. But Ahmedabad and Hyderabad clusters, which are largely into domestic manufacturing, not so much dependent on imported raw material, they are placed better. Now, moving to the financial parameters, like I mentioned in the previous slide, the crude oil prices have been falling. So while there is a slight growth that we're expecting of about 1 to 2% in revenue, crude oil prices are going to aid margins, and raw material accounts for about 60% of the overall cost. And hence that's going to aid the operating margins and the other financial parameters. The return on capital employed is expected to reduce. That's because of some of the capex that has been done recently for backward integration. For the other parameters, the debtor days, we're expecting that to reduce with better farming incomes. Creditor days are flattish to slightly negative, slightly lower, because some manufacturers are not getting the raw material in time. It's stuck at ports, and hence they need to pay their suppliers quicker than last year. Inventory days are expected to go down given the better sales that we expect, and overall the working capital days are expected to go down. Now, before I move to the farm equipment segment, some of the opportunities on the pesticide side, we believe, and two of them stand out. One is that we have an excessive dependence on imports. So one can see here that 45% of the raw material is imported, and 50% of that comes from China. So there is clearly an opportunity for backward integration, and it becomes even more pertinent now because while crude oil prices have plummeted from $100 per barrel to $40, because the raw material has been facing supply chain issues, manufacturers still have had to pay a premium. And while those who are manufacturing it domestically, they are taking the advantage of low crude oil prices to some extent. So backward integration is an opportunity. The second opportunity is on diversification. So if you see China's export basket, there are multiple countries, about 12 countries, which account for about 50% share of China's exports, while only 3 countries make up 50% of our share. And the tick marks that you see are countries where we have an overlap with China in terms of exports. So clearly there are ample opportunities. 75% of the top countries that China exports to, we don't have an significant exposure there, and that's where we could possibly work on. I'll take a minute now before I move to farm equipment, to talk about the proposed ban on pesticide segment. And there's been a lot of talk around this. So this came about mid-May, where the players were given about 45 days to respond, where the government proposed banning 27 molecules. When we see them closely, we see that only 3 of the 27 molecules are highly toxic in nature. There is past precedence too when it comes to such bans. What we've seen in the past, specifically in 2015, where the Verma committee proposed a ban for 66 molecules, eventually that was reduced to 18 molecules. Second thing to note also is that in case of exports, on a case-to-case basis, the government is allowing exports when the exporting destinations do not have a issue with the molecule. Also, we believe that the government now has extended manufacturers to reply to the queries from the government by about 45 more days. And we believe that the banning, if it happens, will be in a phased manner, and manufacturers will be given a good heads up to clear their inventories, etc. So that's largely on the agrochemical space, and I'll now move to the farm equipment segment. And the farm equipment segment is quite interesting in India. There are structural challenges that we have, but I believe there are ample opportunities as well. If we look at the agriculture workforce, and I'll just draw a comparison between USA and India, pretty stark examples, one developed world, one still in the developing zone. What we see is that the agriculture workforce in USA is about 2.5%, and that's close to about 50% in India. So there are a lot of people who can physically do work. The land holding size in India is only 1.14 hectares, while it's about 180 hectares in USA. So that's again another aspect that is, I would say, economies of scale is tilted against India. But what provides, the opportunity are 2 critical things. One is that the total arable land in India is significant. It's about 180 million hectares. If we compare that to many other countries, it's much higher than that. And also, while the wage rate currently is quite low, just $4.4 per day, it's increasing sharply. And that's something which is going to structurally aid the farm equipment sector. With more urbanization happening, with more million-plus cities getting built, like there are more than 300 million-plus cities in China, much lesser in India. With that happening, I believe that structurally the farm equipment sector will see ample opportunities. Now, moving to the specifics of the farm equipment sector, we see here, in terms of value, it's about a 30,000 crore industry, and about 1/4 of that comes from agriculture pumps, so which is on the irrigation side. The remaining 30% comes from implements and equipment which are on the land preparation side, such as rotary tillers, combine cultivators, power tillers, and about 15% of the value lies in the harvesting activities, such as threshers, combine harvesters. So clearly, there is money that is being spent on the irrigation, led by a lot of government schemes, as well as on the land preparation. And there's significant opportunity on the harvesting side. If you look at the growth over the last 5 years, the sector has increased its business by about 50% over the last 5 years, growing at a CAGR of about 8%. This year too, given the lower labor availability in profitable states, like I mentioned, Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, Rajasthan, we're expecting the overall revenue for the segment to increase by about 6%. And the long-term growth should be close to about 8%. Now, SMEs have a significant share in the farm equipment space, close to about 60 to 70%. A lot of SMEs in the Karnal region, also in Coimbatore. We believe that SMEs have been facing some issues on the supply chain front, on the raw material availability front, and hence we believe the SME growth this year could be close to about 4 to 6%. In case of the Karnal cluster, we believe that the northern region, where the profitability is expected to increase, it should actually aid growth there. While in Coimbatore region, we are seeing some lockdown extensions happening. Also, we're witnessing the COVID cases have been increasing. So there are some concerns on that front. If we talk about the structural opportunities, we talk about the near-term growth drivers and some structural growth drivers. In the near-term drivers, we see that the profitability is expected to increase in the northern region by about 3%, and that should aid growth. Labor availability is also lower because of the reverse migration, and that is also expected to aid growth. And there are a lot of schemes that the government has announced, specifically the crop residue management scheme, the SMAM scheme run by the central government, and these are definitely also going to provide growth. On the other side, eastern states are placed unfavorably on these parameters. While the profitability is expected to grow sharply, but that's on a low base, and labor availability is excess. In terms of structural growth drivers as well, you will see that the landholding size, while in India is about 1 hectare, it's about 2.3 hectares in the north, and hence the power usage per hectare is also higher. The number of custom hiring centers, and this is an aspect that will drive growth, because given that we have low land holding sizes, having more custom hiring centers will definitely help, so that the farmer can actually rent out the equipment instead of buying it. So that's structurally something that drives that is expected to drive growth. So we believe that the northern region is placed much more favorably as compared to the eastern region when it comes to incremental opportunities. Something that has been driving growth for this sector has been the subsidy allocation, especially the SMAM subsidy, where the subsidy has actually increased significantly. The allocation has increased over the last 2-3 years by about 3 times, and even the fund utilization is significant. It's been upwards of 80% for all the last 3 to 4 years, and that's an encouraging sign. Also, specifically on the solar pumps, the government has come up with a Kusum scheme. There was a pilot run in Andhra Pradesh last year, and the government wants to ensure de-dieselization of farms, and the farmer can actually also use the electricity produced through those solar equipment to sell to use for other activities, and also sell in case there is an excess. And there are a host of subsidies being given on that. 60% subsidies given by the government, 30% as bank loans, and only 10% of the cost has to be borne by the farmer. So clearly the government is taking steps in the right direction in order to ensure access to solar pumps, given that most of our country has ample sunlight throughout the year. In terms of the release of subsidies at the state level, we're seeing that there is good traction in the southern states, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu. They are one of the leaders in the subsidy allocation over the last 3 years. Talking about the revenue and the financial parameters, we're expecting the SME revenues to grow by about 4 to 6%. Iron and steel are important cost commodities, and raw materials about 80% of the cost. Given the COVID pandemic, the commodity prices are bearish. So while the sector is not expected to take a hit on the demand side, it's going to take advantage on the supply side with lower raw material prices, and that will aid the margins. In terms of the working capital requirement, we believe that the working capital days should reduce with a lowering of the inventory days with better sales. So that's largely on the 3 segments, and these are the ones which are providing a glimmer of hope amidst all the gloom and doom that we're seeing around. So now over to you, Subhash, for the question and answers.
Thank you, Bhushan. That was very comprehensive, taking 3 major sectors in the agri inputs. Really good. Let's move on to question and answers immediately. We've got a lot coming in. Ladies and gentlemen, please use the Q&A option to ask your questions. Let's go first. How is the drip score calculated? I've got several people asking me this.
Sure.
Yes. Hi, Subhash. This is Hetal here. The question on how is the drip score calculated. So this is a score which is being calculated by the CRISIL CSIR team for almost a decade now. The simple factors that need to be considered when somebody wants to calculate the impact of rainfall on agriculture is by looking at vulnerability and by looking at the shock quotient. So therefore, vulnerability gets defined by the proportion of unirrigated area in a region. For example, states like Punjab and Haryana, despite of having lower rainfalls, continue to have better sowing because of the higher irrigation available in those states. So that's why drip score takes into account percentage of unirrigated area, multiplies it with the percentage of deficiency, and calculates a score that lies between 0 to 100. The higher value means a greater impact. First, the score is calculated for each crop in the state, and then it is aggregated across all states for each crop to get a crop level drip score, and a similar process is being carried out to get a state level drip score. over the past 10 years, when we look at the efficacy of the DRIP scores and agri GDP, what we find is that they have an inverse relationship. Higher the DRIP score, lower is the agri GDP growth rate. And 9 out of 10 times, we have been able to estimate or establish a strong relationship between DRIP scores published by CRISIL and the final agri GDP growth rates that pan out in that year. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks for that very comprehensive answer. I'll quickly move on to the next question. What do you see the growth rate for seed producers and distributors segment, specifically for MSMEs?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. In terms of the growth, we're expecting similar growth for the manufacturers as well as distributors, given that too much inventory is not held up, and we're looking at a growth of about 1%. And this will vary depending on the region. So while say in the southern states in AP and Telangana, the manufacturers and the distributors could see a increase in their revenue because there is an unprecedented increase that we are observing for the cotton acreage. But while for the western region, Gujarat and Maharashtra, the manufacturers and distributors might see a decline in revenue of around 5-6%. That's because of the cotton seed acreage lowering. And why cotton becomes important is in terms of the cost. The cotton seed has a really high cost share, which leads to it having about a 27% share in the overall seed revenue. So it's going to be a mixed bag depending on the region.
Sure, thanks. Moving on to another thing. What is the total vegetable market size that you foresee, and how much of it is imports? Where are the opportunities for the vegetable market?
Right. Madhuri, do you want to take that one?
So I'll take that one, Bhushan. So speaking of the vegetable market size, the vegetable market size in India is close to around rupees 50 billion currently. And as correctly mentioned, that a lot of it is imported because of a lot of MNCs are into this, and a lot of companies from outside India have also put in their offices in India for the imports of the vegetable seeds currently. But the opportunity that gives it here is that currently India is exporting less than 10 billion, less than 10 billion of the overall seed industry, and less than 1 billion in terms of exports of vegetable. So that gives us ample opportunity to export to nations. And there are a lot of manufacturing hubs in India like AP, Gujarat, and that AP, Gujarat, Telangana. So that can be utilized to the benefit in future. We can reduce our dependency on exports and can also enter into the exports into other markets in future.
Thanks, Madhuri. I'll move on to a very interesting question here now. Can you specifically throw some light on the tractor market? Is it true that compared to China, our ratio of usage is much higher and hence tractor growth is peaked? What's your view?
So, interesting question, definitely, but I don't believe that the tractor industry has peaked. If we look at the total arable land in India and the total population of tractors, there is immense scope. And the reason why I say that is most of the tractors, it might not make economic sense to go for a tractor if the land size is less than 2 hectares. And the average land holding size in India is 1 hectare. So it is the business model that needs to evolve. More custom hiring centers that can lead to growth in demand. So I think it still remains an untapped market, given that 85% of our farmers are marginal and small, where they have land holding less than 2 hectares, where it does not make sense to buy a tractor. So I would say that, it's still underpenetrated. The business model is what will drive growth. And if we have more custom hiring centers, more renting, leasing models, I think that's what will lead to growth. So to answer that question, I don't think we're at our peak or even close to that.
That's good to know in terms of opportunity sizing, Now, in the medium term, what impact you see from the technology disruptors and aggregators such as IoT, drones, especially from India perspective, where you mentioned most of us are, marginal farmers?
Right. That's a very interesting question. In fact, there has been so much, investment happening on that front. There have been so many startups talking about that. At an early stage, where we're seeing adoption for this is in a lot of insurance, by insurance companies. So it's expensive to actually use these technologies. Like I said, Indian farms are small in size, unlike say USA, which is 180 hectares. So a farmer does not know what's happening in one corner of his farm. So he can use the drone or satellite imagery actually to understand that. He also doesn't know whether all his crops are getting good, irrigation. So the IoT and the sensors help him understand if there's moisture reduction in certain crops. In case of India, at a farmer level, we believe that the opportunities are not as significant, but from an organization level, for insurance companies, when they want to settle claims, that's where, what the government tells them versus what they can get from the imagery, for them to be prepared for the next steps as to how much disbursement can happen. They can check in the middle of the season. So in August, they can have a look at how the crop growth is. Are there pest attacks? Has the farmer sprayed pesticides? Through machine learning, even those are possible. So I think at an initial stage, the opportunities are more B2B in nature, and maybe as the business models evolve, the opportunities will go to B2C.
That's nice. That's nice. Okay, Bhushan, do you have any sights on FDI in the agri sector? And as you rightly said, the exports are to decline, which will be applicable on a lot of essential commodities also. So how do you see this panning out?
So on the export side, definitely we believe that this year we've all been globally hit by a pandemic, and so it's not business as usual. So there are, especially on the discretionary goods side, like I mentioned, textile is a sector that we believe can get impacted. That will have a bearing on cotton exports. Chili, where we export about 50% to China. Grapes, we've already seen the exports being hit significantly. The grape prices, which used to be close to about 60 rupees a kg, have dropped in their peak season to about 10-15 rupees a kg. Mango, not a significant share in terms of exports, but the Alfonso variety goes to Middle East and Europe. We saw an impact there. So that's something that we see in the near term. Things should evolve in the future. Coming on the FDI question, I think that's an area where I think we will definitely see some traction. And the reason why I say that is, if we look at the reforms that the government has been talking about, while we would still await the fine print as to how the implementation would be, but removing agriculture commodities from the essential commodity bucket, that's a step in encouraging private participation. The government wants private players to not shy away from agriculture. They want them to set up warehouses. They want them to set up processing units. So the investment in the food processing parks, doing away with the Essential Commodities Act in normal circumstances, and also putting in place a legal framework for contract manufacturing. I think these three things are definitely going to attract the FDI into India, given that we have a large population, which is a consumption base, and also a huge arable land.
Cool, thanks. I'm going to take one last question. To everyone whose questions were not answered, please don't worry. We'll attempt to answer all your questions post this session. We'll be sharing a PDF with answers for them. Last question for today, Bhushan. What's your outlook on the micro irrigation sector?
So, micro irrigation is a sector that has a lot of meaning in India, because that is something which ensures adequate water. So we have a lot of water guzzling crops. We have sugarcane grown in many regions where water availability is not as strong. If we look at the overall irrigation coverage in India, it's only 50%. So 50% is left to the rain gods, which leads to a lot of volatility in production, in prices, in farmer remuneration, and that's a lot of mess that can be avoided with micro irrigation. The right dosage of water can be given. It'll lead to better yield. It'll lead to better, lower volatility in production, better prices, better quality. So I think there are a lot of upsides to micro irrigation. The government has been encouraging this through various central and state level schemes, where farmers do not have to bear the full initial outgo. However, having said that, what we've typically seen in years where the monsoon is very strong, the spends on irrigation tend to go down, because that's a general feeling that a person would have, that if I have the rain gods in support, then I would not want to unnecessarily splurge. So we've seen that could happen in the near term. But I think if we talk about it structurally, I think that sector is definitely going to see growth, especially because the government is invested heavily in it in terms of the subsidies.
Good. Thank you so much, Bhushan. Thank you, Deepti. Thank you, Madhuri. Thank you, Hetal. And over to you, Hetal, for the final session for today, which is just the closing comments. Over to you, Hetal.
Yeah, thank you so much, Subhash and Bhushan, for the Q&A. So we may not have been able to answer all questions, but we'll get back personally for some important ones that we would have missed out. I think one segment which we did not touch upon today, but also continues to be a very important and relevant segment, is the fertilizer sector. We believe that sector also has been bearing the brunt of volatility in rainfalls. For example, last year itself, growths were a little on the moderate category, with urea growing at around 2%, and non-urea segments driving growth at around 3.5%. Within the non-urea space also, we see DAP and NPK growing faster, whereas potash, MOP kind of product categories have been growing a little lower. Because of the lower rains and the not so good distribution of the rainfall, discounts were pretty heavy in the markets last year, and which impacted margins of players. We believe FY21 will be a better year, while growth rates would be more inching towards a 4% range given the high base of this segment. But given that discounts will not be very heavy, we believe margins of both categories of players will continue to improve. So, with this, we close our session on agriculture, but this is not the end of it. We are planning many more such sessions along with HSBC. Our next topic of focus would be chemicals and plastic industry in India. I would now hand over to the HSBC team for final concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hetal, and thank you to our audience who've been with us through the session. Before you leave today, we'd like to let you know that we will be sharing the presentation, the replay, a podcast, a charticle, as well as answers to most of your questions. Once again, a huge thank you for all of you who've taken your precious time to attend this. I hope this session was very enriching for you, and hope future sessions will be the same. Please keep safe. Please stay connected with us, both HSBC and CRISIL, and thank you for coming.